everyone. My name is Véronique Bouchard. I'm a teacher here at EMLYON since 2000. I used to be a strategy consultant. I am now a professor in strategy. And the topic of my research has been corporate entrepreneurship. So what I've been doing as part of my research is try to accumulate as many facts as I could find on corporate entrepreneurship practices. So I tried to locate case studies describing the attempts by a large company at encouraging entrepreneurial behavior in their midst. I also wrote many cases myself. I was in contact with the companies essentially in France and was able to write, in-depth case analysis of their practices, why they did it, how they did it, and what came out of it. And what I'm going to present to you is part of the results of my study on corporate entrepreneurship, always based on practical cases. So what is entrepreneurial? What is an entrepreneurial individual? And we could assume that this individual could be an employee or he could be on his own. I would say for me the first quality or the first trait is that someone who's able to seize an opportunity, or at least seize opportunities where others don't see any. So the concept of opportunity is really the starting point of any entrepreneurial process. Then entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial individuals are autonomous. They're self-standing, they make their own decisions, they take their own risk. They are a risk taker. Also, they first decide what to do and then they find the resources, whereas the managerial or administrative type, on the contrary, would first try to gather the resource and then decide what to do with those resources. So action and then finding resources rather than the opposite. Normally, there's a good amount of creativity, either in the idea itself. Also, there's an element of flexibility, responsiveness in the behavior of the entrepreneur. Obviously, there's an element of tenacity. I mean, you cannot be successful unless you're extremely tenacious. And finally, there's this notion that if you're an entrepreneur, you're not afraid of anything, and in order to complete your project, you're willing to do about anything. If you need to sweep the floor, you will sweep the floor. Very, very simple definition of corporate entrepreneurship: the adoption of entrepreneurial values, attitudes, and behaviors by the employees of established firms. So a first understanding of corporate entrepreneurship is when an established organization enters a new business. So this is called corporate entrepreneurship, and it's a kind of firm-level behavior. They're not looking at the individuals, they're looking at the firm, and they reckon that whenever a firm enters an entirely new business, it's behaving in an entrepreneurial way. It's taking risk, it's being proactive, it's being creative, etc., etc. So here we're talking about a process. We're talking about following individuals as they do something. They basically champion new product ideas, new product or business ideas, or any kind of significantly innovative ideas. And then a third definition, or third part of the definition, an entrepreneurial philosophy permeates an entire organization's outlook and operation. So here we talk about the entrepreneurial corporation. It's the whole organization that supports entrepreneurial behavior. Well, if we look at why companies do it and what are their expectations, we will find that there are four of them. So the classics are two. One classic expectation is the economical benefits. So here we hope that by encouraging people to behave entrepreneurially, we will generate more innovation, we will generate more new products, and therefore will stimulate growth, internal growth. Okay, so that sounds like a pretty good reason to do it. But very often, and I would say in almost all cases, there's a kind of dual expectation. Yes, there is an expectation in terms of revenues, additional revenues, but there is also an expectation in terms of what will happen to the corporate climate. People will be more fulfilled. People will be happier. High potential people will remain in the company because they have opportunities to express themselves. Okay? So very often you see that those are kind of inseparable. What we also see is that people learn to cooperate. They learn to cultivate horizontal relations, new networks. They create new networks within and outside the organization. So they acquire a lot of new competencies. And overall, the organization learns a new repertoire of competencies. At the end, corporate entrepreneurship is a way to accelerate time to market. It's a way to say that the normal, regular innovation, R&D processes, new product development processes are too slow. So we need to put the baby in the hands of an individual or a small group of individuals who will be able to accelerate the process. Corporate entrepreneurship can be either induced by the management, encouraged, and this is what we're going to look at, how the management of large companies encourage this behavior, but it can also be completely spontaneous. In some cases they are successful, in some cases they are not successful. So sometimes they're not successful because the organization resists, okay? And sometimes they're not successful because the project is not so good, but many times it's because they have to fight. They have to fight and they have to surmount obstacles which the organization willingly or unwillingly creates in continuation for whoever gets out of the normal track. My study is really looking at how large companies induce, through what tools, through what systems, through what actions, induce entrepreneurial behaviors. How can you turn your employees into entrepreneurs? Now, another segmentation axis is the level of structural integration of this practice vis-à-vis the mainstream. So here the question is, where are located corporate entrepreneurs? Are they still attached to operational divisions? I mean, they're still doing their job, and on top of it, they are corporate entrepreneurs. On the contrary, are we saying that corporate entrepreneurs should have a place of their own? They should be isolated from the mainstream? Or are we in a situation which is kind of hybrid? So here we have an entity which by certain characters is autonomous, but still maintains a strong link, and we will develop on that, with the mainstream. The micro levers, micro or not so micro. So essentially, I identified 7 most recurrent levers which are used by companies combined in order to encourage entrepreneurial behavior. The first one is the explicit commitment of the top management to corporate entrepreneurship. So here we have top management declaring that they want more employees to behave entrepreneurially, that they will be supported, that they will get resources, that it's a good thing, that so on and so forth. The second lever is this notion that entrepreneurs, in a way or another, need autonomy. This is just what you said. If you don't have autonomy, you're not an entrepreneur. Another very important lever is that you all know that most organizations, large organizations, function in silos, and that people become hyper-specialists, and that they hardly talk to anyone except the guy in the office in front. Okay? maybe 2 offices to the left and 2 offices to the right, but that's the max. Okay? Well, this is it's not creating an atmosphere which is very supportive of corporate entrepreneurship. Why? Because you don't get a lot of new ideas, only talking to the same 3 people all the time. And then when it's time to make it happen, you don't get a lot of support either, okay? So a very, very important lever is to make sure that people of different background, of different departments, of different areas communicate and can exchange. You will not be surprised that obviously there has to be some incentive and rewards, because yes, it's true that a lot of corporate entrepreneurs are initially motivated by intrinsic motivation. They really want to do something nice, something fun, so they're not asking for anything. But if you want them to find the courage and the tenacity to win over obstacle over the 2-3 years that the project will require, well, you need to give them something in exchange. Another lever is the promotion of corporate entrepreneurship through HR policies. So here the concept is that companies want to encourage corporate entrepreneurship. Some companies are very selective of who they hire, and they make sure they hire entrepreneurial profiles. Other companies maybe are not that good at hiring, but then they say maybe through training we can turn employees into entrepreneurs. And EMLYON has done that a lot, trainings for employees to help them develop entrepreneurial attitude and competencies. Then, very, very important, in my opinion, maybe the most important lever, is to have a formal project evaluation and support procedure. So people who have a project know where to go to get a first answer. They know how to format the description of their project. They have some help. They can discuss with someone, and they can submit that and get a feedback. And then there is something which is really interesting, that in some company you are all aware of, that Google gives time to their employee to pursue their own project. And this is the case at 3M also. There was a 15% time rule where you dispose of 15% of your time to develop your own project. You don't need to tell to your boss what you're doing with this time. It's your time. Okay, so what I want to tell you is that the various practices assemble these basic levers. These are the, 90% of the levers which I identify fall in these categories, in these 7 categories. And the various practices which I observed combine these in different ways. But I cannot get into full detail. So the outcome of, segmenting by scope, segmenting by level of structural integration, essentially allows me to propose 7 types of corporate entrepreneurship practices. So this cell is essentially, it's the smallest of all the corporate entrepreneurship practice. It's dedicated to a single project. So normally it's composed of people who report directly to the senior manager. So you could call that a task force, okay? Except it's a task force which is composed of people who are risk-taker, entrepreneurial, who have some complementary functional competencies, and are there essentially to do what I just mentioned, accelerate time to market. Do you know the Nespresso case? Okay, it took about 20 years of work to the team in charge of Nespresso to turn it into a success, okay? It was almost cancelled or flunked about 5 times. And they managed to survive, and at the end, now it's really one of the most profitable division, I think, in Nestlé, okay? This group, they were kind of a little bit marginals in the company. They were hidden. Everybody was, hidden, and whenever they would come out, they were criticized, so they would go back to hide, and so on and so forth. So here you have the notion that these people have a lot of autonomy vis-a-vis the rest of the organization, that they work at their rhythm, that they take more risk, okay? And it works well. The pathway. So what is the pathway? It's multi-project. So here the idea is the CEO wants to have many corporate entrepreneurs, okay? But on the other hand, he's not willing to take a big risk or to challenge the existing organizational structure. So what does he do? Well, essentially, he creates incentives and support and communicates around these incentives and support. And it's something very open, very democratic, tells to all the employees that they can, on top of their regular job, propose an idea and slowly test it, get a feedback, get resources, and go through the various stages that eventually will bring them to either the completion of the idea and coming back to their regular job, or if it's a bigger project, an entirely new job, which would be to manage, for example, the new business they have created. The only problem is that the outcome is rarely, a multi-billion business. It's at the most, these are incremental projects, small projects. Now, if we want to be more ambitious, and our aim here is not to maximize the number of participants, but to maximize the revenues generated, then we have another approach. Then we become very selective. We create an entirely separate division with its own rules, its own management, its own resources. And we tell to these guys, you have money, you have carte blanche. All we expect from you is, very successful, large businesses in the next 5 years. If this is done well, and that was the case at Lucent Technologies, after a few years, there were, a lot of very large, very interesting projects that were valued in the range of several $100 million. And the internal rate of return was over 70%. So very interesting, okay, in economic terms. The only problem is that this division, this entrepreneurial division, had a lot of conflict with the rest of the organization. The other problem you have is that in the beginning they're very autonomous, but then in later stage of product development, in the commercialization stage, they need the help. They need the resource of the operating divisions. And those guys tell you, look, I don't know who you are. I've never seen you. You're asking me to produce this or to sell this. I don't know who you are. So a lot of conflict. So the booster is a kind of division, but which is politically better structured to limit the conflicts and tensions we just mentioned. So it's essentially a matter of positioning because the job is very similar. Okay? It's to accelerate the development of very innovative ideas. The difference is that the portfolio of invention is decided jointly with the operating division. And the entity, the entrepreneurial entity, is presented as a kind of consulting service or ancillary service which allows existing division to not to take the risk because they cannot take this level of risk. They cannot go that fast. So it's a kind of service, internal service, which allows them to limit the risk and accelerate product development life cycles. Okay? Also, the difference here is that no one inside there calls himself or herself an entrepreneur and brags that they are entrepreneur. Here, these are people who are normal employees. They're just very good at business development. Then we move to a completely different approach. Here again, we want to make sure that there are multiple corporate entrepreneurial projects within the company, but we use entirely different levers. Up to now, we have seen essentially organizational levers. Okay, processes and organization. Here, what we want to modify is the mindset of people. Essentially, the idea here is to train and convert a selected group of managers which in their turn, will indoctrinate and will convert their own employees. So it's the notion of the oil stain, that it's, not being an entrepreneur is really a matter of mindset, and being an entrepreneur is a matter of mindset too. We change your mindset, and if we change your mindset, well, then you can have an impact on your teams and turn them into entrepreneurs. So one of the problems is what I've seen, because I had direct experience of this over and over, is that the people who are sent to do the training, sometimes they don't have a choice. Because there's like a kind of an order that says there has to be one person in each department, so they are that person and they're not motivated. Or very often this could be similar in terms of content to a mini MBA. So for them it's really a way to acquire skills, but not necessarily the entrepreneurial mindset. So this is one problem, but it's not the only one. The other problem is that you have several people who really believe in it and who get really motivated, but then around them there is nothing. So they start a project, they push the project, and there's no one. No support, no follow-up, no whatever. No. So it becomes, I think, very counterproductive. Okay, now we move to the two corporate entrepreneurship practices which are comprehensive, i.e. it's the whole organization. We're not talking about, the organization and there is a part which is, no, it's the whole organization. So they are organizations which are real, which are constructed and managed like incubators. And the example we used to give a long time ago was 3M. Now it's Google, Alphabet. And one of the most interesting cases I've been able to observe is WL Gore. You all know Gore-Tex, the fabric? Okay, well, the company that produces Gore-Tex is Gore. And each of the employee of Gore is called an associate. And if you want to read something interesting, try to find somewhere on the internet the description how this company is run. Essentially, these are organizations which are very flat. As soon as an entity grows beyond a certain size, it's divided in two entities, because the belief here is that if it's too big, it's not manageable, which is true. So beyond, I don't remember the rule, but like 200, it becomes another company, another branch, another something, okay? Because there has to be always this kind of mutual adjustment where people meet in the corridor, they exchange, they solve problem like that. No, not by writing mails and having like 200 approvals and waiting for, it cannot work like that, okay? So it has to be proximity, a lot of proximity, a lot of communication, a lot of money to try things. Also the fact that failing is not a problem. If you've done it, with a certain panache, it's okay for a good cause. Okay? So these are companies normally which innovate a lot and for whom it's critical to create new products at a very high rate. Then there is another model which is similar, but is less oriented towards innovation. Here, the idea is that all the members of the staff are also associates, but they are not there to innovate, they are there to grow the business. So everybody in the company is business oriented. From the portier to the CEO, they all think business and how the business is going this month, and are we growing, and how many new clients, and also it's very Anglo-Saxon. And I was lucky to study one company which has a branch in France, which was created in the UK, a service company which has that spirit. And in this case, what they do is really, it's through the HR policy. They are very, very strict in who they recruit. They look for entrepreneurial profiles. They have their way to assess that, to make sure that whoever enters this company, is highly autonomous, highly motivated, and so on and so forth. Here the expectation, as I told you, is less on innovating, creating new business, than growing existing business.